The topics that I'm going to be covering today is the roster budgets, which was a big thing from the last webinar. So we're going to bring that one in. And so, yeah, so we'll have the roster budgets. Then I'm going to cover sort of the new ClockOn Go invitation. So all of you who are using ClockOn Go, it has been a little bit cumbersome to get your employees to do the uptake of that using an uptake of ClockOn Go. So this will allow you to send an email and they can click on a link. We'll go through that. Going to run through some timesheet tips and tricks and understand the roundings a little bit better. So hopefully that will help. Some of those things a lot of people might know. It might be some new stuff. I'm going to go through the timesheet approval, the lockdown process as well. And we've also got new timesheet integration with MYOB account right for anyone who's not using our payroll. They'll be able to use that integration very shortly, if not already. So we'll run through sort of how that works. That also, timesheet integration has some manual timesheet exports if you're using other systems like Xero or anything else that you might need an export on that. So that's pretty new and pretty exciting for us to get that happening. All right, so hopefully everyone can see my screen now. So I'm just jumped into ClockOn and I'm going to get into the rosters straight away. We're going to go over to the roster budgets. Sorry, it's just loaded up on the wrong monitor for me. Okay, so we're going to go into the roster budgets here. So essentially, like, what are ClockOn's roster budgets? So they are a measure of the wages against either a sales value or a hard dollar value, like wages cost that you're wanting to look at. They are a snapshot of looking at the roster's shifts that you've got loaded. And it can be done for both a combination of these unpublished shifts in red or published shifts. So it's really just looking at the period that you've got loaded. And we're looking at a period that's loaded, broke down into the locations you've got loaded. So from your locations on the sidebar here, depending on what you've got loaded, down to the department level, and then into the costs for those departments per day. So it drills down to a daily level, and it's looking at the departments that you've got set up. So to get the budgets happening, if you come to the desktop, you can just open the budgets left or the multi-panel left sidebar, and that'll give you the budgets tab down the bottom here. And then once you've got that and you've navigated to the period that you're looking at, we can click on the roster costs button from the calculate tab. So if we click on this roster costs section, you'll notice a couple of things happen. We've got some information down the side here. We also, all the shifts expand a little bit, and you get a little bit more information showing you on how many normal hours there are and sort of the costs of those. If there's any overtimes or penalties, they will also show on these shifts. And if there's any sorts of allowances, they may also show. So it can get a little bit crowded at times, as you can see here. It's trying to get all the information on there, but if you can't quite see all of that information, you can then come into the roster costs and break down and have a look at what all of the information there for the period. We can also jump in down to the Payslips and have a look at specific people to have a look at their normal hours, any allowances that might be there, or any sorts of leave accruals on that. When you first jump in, there won't be this sales figure here. I've sort of just added it in, and I'll show you how to do that as well. But when you first sort of jump into rosters, budgeting with the rosters here, there's a couple of things you may need to think about. So at the moment, I've just got my normal departments that I've broken that down to. I've just got a question about going over that again. I'll probably sort of repeat myself a little bit in coming through, but essentially when you do press those roster costs calculate button here, it brings out the information on all of the shifts about that particular shift for that particular person that's on that shift. If you need to drill down and look a little bit more at specific people, you can look at this pay slips, and just using the little triangles, it will expand down the differences between any normal, or where's Walter there? And any, if they've got any normal or penalties or overtimes, it'll give you a cost breakdown for sort of the pay slips. So it sort of runs a payroll in memory in the background to calculate that sort of stuff on the budget. Now, as I was saying before, is you may want to, if you're wanting to break down and get the costs of sort of a subset of your department, so we often get questions, can we do that by roles? No, we can't do roster budget breakdowns by roles. So if that is important, you may need to create some subset departments within your system to give you that further breakdown of what you're budgeting. Just be aware that if you're then going to do your costing reports for the whole department, you'll need to make sure you select all of those sub-departments that you might have created there. So in this case, we've got pharmacists, but if you wanted to break that down between, say, pharmacists or dispense tech or multiple levels within the pharmacist department, then you would need multiple departments to be able to do that. So that's sort of a difference between sort of rostered departments in your normal costings to what you want to budget. You may want to look at that restructure of the departments there. On the so once you've come in here, we can change the view here to what you want to see. High obviously expands everything, down gives you a bit more information. Medium, it's probably a good place to start. There's also I guess the budgeting methodology to see what you're looking at within your budgets. So you can break down what you're looking at. So you can sort of look at the direct costs to your business. So the gross hours, the leave taken, and any sorts of allowances. And you can turn these on and off. And you'll notice in the background, we've got the numbers sorts of changing depending on what we turn on and off. And then we've got the accruals, so you can have a look at the liabilities to the business, whether it's the super costs or what would have been accrued in leave. Typically with the accruals, you'd turn off the gross or the leave taken from the budget if you're looking at you wanting to look at actual costs of the budget at any one time. Otherwise, you're sort of going to get a double up on costing, in the sense that if you're looking at the accruals, then once they've taken leave, it's already paid by the business because they've accrued the leave, provided obviously they've got leave balances. But so determine that budgeting methodology and just stick with it time and time again. That way you get a consistency with your numbers on that. So once you've selected it, and like I said, you can see as we tick these on and off, it's going to start changing the hours on this. Hours sort of is hidden behind this drop down, but we can turn on and off what we're wanting to look at on that. So I'm using it for here. I'm looking at rather this sales column as being a sales figure. I'm looking at more as a wage cost. So I'm wanting to keep this budget column in as about 100%. So if you make a change up the top, so if I change that to 0, it's going to zero everything out, and same with the budget column. So these are the two columns that we can then enter information in. So if we enter a figure in here, it's going to evenly spread it down the line in the hierarchy there. So each department's going to get the same cost, which may not be what you're expecting there on the wages. And same if we do the budget, if I just do 100%, we can see, just have at a quick glance, the ones that go red are going over budget. And if we expand down there, we can see what days they are. But 2,800 here is probably not a number that's actually ever going to work with the management here. So you're probably better off looking at the 3,200, and we can break that down. And even with that, we can still see on the 16th and 17th that they're going more over the budget here on there. So So you can come in and break those costs down. You can even go into a per day. So if you know, say your Thursdays cost more because you're doing longer trade or something like that, you can also increase that number there and get a more relevant cost of what you're expecting your wages to be. And so, yeah, so you can change those down the line there. So once you've sort of worked out, if say you were looking at probably like a sales cost, it's more, you'll probably have a lower percentage you're looking at. So, and that might be say 10% or, or 15%. And that's probably more looking at a cost ratio to how many people that you're putting on the floor to cover the type of work that you're expecting on those sorts of days. So yeah, you can do either or of those. And again, just work with your methodology on those sorts of budgets, and stick with that, because that's going to give you consistency over time. Now, oops, that's not. Okay, so in balancing budgets, there's a couple of things you can do. So if we're looking specifically, say, at the management department, we can come in on the roster screen and right-click and view selected departments. And then we're only sort of looking at those particular shifts that are potentially we're wanting to balance up here. And so as we look, we can see along for our 2IC, we've got Clemens here, and come Thursday, he's been working his butt off, and you can see it starts kicking into some overtimes for the rest of the week. So what we can then do is potentially we can come over to the employee screen, and using some of our filters, so the filter by role is a good one. So when we select on that shift, everybody who has that role assigned to them is going to be highlighted up. And if we show available between as well, it'll just make sure we're only looking at the people who are available. So now we've got a couple of decisions. Is we can have a look at their rostered hours versus their normal working hours. So you can see Darren there's working rostered for 66.5 hours, and he should normally only work 38 hours. But he's got a low pay rate. So there's two sort of options you can look at here on how you want to balance that. So we might go, okay, well, we want someone else who normally does 24 hours. They haven't done any work this week. So we can drag and drop a new person onto that. And they're going to get some penalties kicking in on that particular shift. But when we come back to the budgets, we can see as we make changes to people, it is going to update. So what's going on here? So Clemens now with the Saturdays as overtimes. We could say change these two particular shifts, and we'll pick someone else. And as we come in now, instead of having the 2 days being over budget, we've got the 1 day. So that's on the 16th. So if we select that particular day, we can expand down and we can see it's to do with 4.5 hours of penalties. So if we want to sit it within our balance that we've set, we could come into the view, once we've selected that shift, even come into timeline with Zoom, and we can remove sort of that additional time potentially. And that's going to then update and remove the penalties there. It doesn't quite get us under, but it gets us pretty close, and it may be we might need to be able to shorten this. Now, obviously, shortening shifts isn't always going to work, but as you shorten them, you can see how it is in real time updating your budget there. Click timeline with Zoom and it jumps back out. And so once, say, you're happy with the budget that you've got, we can actually save the budget. So we can come back to it and compare it with budgets in the future or the past. So as you save them, you're saving it for the period that you've got loaded. And so here, I've just saved this one. I might want to compare it back. So if you're doing it regularly, you may even have back to the same time last year. It might be from 3 weeks ago, or you might want to compare your Easter rosters between the last year and the next year. So it's just a matter of ticking on or off the rosters that you're wanting to compare those with. And once you've ticked on them, just click on, you want to select and you click on the load budget. If you've made changes, it'll ask you to save those. And so as we come in, you can see now it's loaded the 2 periods. So we've got the 13th of the 5th down the bottom and the previous one, which I've loaded up the top. So we can have a look between the 2 differences. So around the 8th of the 4th, there was a lower cost of wage, higher cost of wage, and you can come in and make comparisons with those. You can also, sort of hidden here on this more buttons section right at the end, we can come into print and we can have a look at the roster budgets if you want to have a little bit of a closer look. And so using this roster budgets preview screen, it's going to show you the comparison on the dates for the periods that you've got loaded. Now you can choose from the report screen if you want to use a different roster budget report here, but the one that I've selected sort of broken down day by day and group those departments day by day. So you can have a look between the 2 over that particular time and see what they are. Now with the printing, I recommend once you do your roster budget at the start of your rostering period, do the budget and print this report out. Because the budgets are a snapshot of that time, at the end of your period, you'll have made adjustments to shifts, people have gone on leave, there'll be all sorts of changes as you're aware, updating your timesheets, payroll, there'll be differences there. And if you then run the budget roster costs at the end of the pay period, the numbers are going to be different from the start because it is, as I said before, it is a snapshot of what you are looking at on the roster screen there. So those saved budgets from the past are going to be what was sort of payrolled or locked down within your system there. So they're going to be more realistic or accurate views of what that budget is. Another report which is quite useful is if you're looking at the roster costing report, and this is what you can use as well once you've processed your pays or processed your lock down those timesheets. You can use this report and compare it with your department cost and cost summary reports, and it's going to show you once it loads up. Nope. Sorry about this, it's sort of hidden there. Yeah, so it's going to show you a similar breakdown to your department costing reports because it's got, like the budgets, they look at each department. So you're going to be able to look at those same sorts of costings. And it's never good when the program freezes when you try to run a report. So sorry about this. Oh, there it is. I'm just being impatient. So this is sort of broken down in here. So you can see that the leave accruals that will come through from the roster costs. Those leave accruals aren't going to show on the department cost split reports, but pretty much everything from this hours back is going to show in that department's costs, other than things like the salary sacrifice and co-contribution. So they're the allowances setting that you turn on within the roster costing window. And again, a good one to print at the start of your roster period, so you can then reprint it at the end of your rostering period to then compare those 2 reports with each other. All right. Excellent. So once you're finished with that, with the roster budgets, to get back out of there, you can turn the roster costs off. We've saved it, so it's giving our hard figures that are saved, and they're all in there. So it does work on both published and unpublished rosters. So you can do a roster up, have a look at it, make changes, get it how you like it, and then publish it. So it's a good way to have a look at those costs before they before you publish it and get your staff onto looking at the ClockOn Go and checking out their rosters. All right, so moving out of the roster section here, going to jump into now with the ClockOn Go invitations there quickly. So on the setup tab for the access has been, one thing before I forget, on the roster budgets, there is a security role that can lock down what costings are being seen. So if you want to set it up for your managers to look at the budgets but to not be able to make changes, you can give that security role set up so they can view various different things within those roster budgets. So if you scroll down in here into the security roles, when we get to the rosters, so we can change, it's a bit hard to see, so whether or not they can add, edit, or make changes to the roster budgets, the detail level, how far they can go, what costs are included within the roster budgets, you can do there. And you can also see and turn off whether they can view the employees' wages or sales targets and the budgets in general there. So there is a little bit of access level if you're wanting to set that budget and then you're just wanting your managers to look at it and adjust accordingly, you can do that as well. All right, so moving to the setup tab, we've got the ClockOn Go invitation. It's been out for a little while now. We've had a pretty good response on it. So for those who may or may not be using it, if you are, sorry, it might be a little bit of double up information. But for those who are not, hopefully it's going to help with the uptake of your employees using ClockOn Go. So if we come into here, first thing to sort of set up is just the server settings that are in it. So clicking on this server settings button, we can add the IP address for your ClockOn Go server and also the port number that's set up. Typically that port number is 9000. And then you've got the database name here. So if we're hosting your data and the ClockOn Go server, please just shoot an email through to support@clockon.com.au and the support team will be able to reply back with your server IP and port number for the Go settings there. So once they're added in, you can use the filters obviously just to have a look at the various locations and departments if you want to just send it to a small group of people. Everyone who has email addresses will be listed down here. And to send them the email, we'll just click on the select button and click on send. And so that then is sending an email through to ClockOn, to the employee's email address, I should say, sorry. And so when they then pick it up, I'll just open up my emails. So I sent one testing it earlier this morning and I sent another one then. So you can keep sending it. It will show that they've been invited. It will show that they've been invited, and while this window is open, you will see a sent button for everyone who's been sent the invitation. Once they're invited, they do get hidden here on this list when you come back into again, but you can just open that filter up and you can resend it to the people. So if they say, I've forgotten my password, or I didn't use it, or I didn't get it, you can resend that again. So sometimes it might have gone to their junk folder. They might be looking at the wrong email address. So they do need to have access to the emails on their phone to be able to see it. And when you open up that email, it's got a link so they can get to the app stores to download the app itself, and that's in that top part. Down the bottom here, they can click on this click here link, and that will then go straight into the app and load those details up. So I'm just going to quickly open up the app here. So if I have a look at the settings, I'm just connected to the trial server at the moment. So I've actually got details already in ClockOn Go in the app that I've got. So it's just using our demo data. So if I now come in and close that one down, if I come in here, click here, it does a quick redirect to the website to get an encrypted copy of all of the details that need to be added to the ClockOn Go app, loads up ClockOn Go, opens it up, and it logs them straight in. So you'll see now that I'm now Claire Bailey, not Floyd Everett. And if we come into the settings, I've got the server details that were set up in these server settings. And the username and password that's set up on my employee details has come through. So I haven't actually had to tell any of, you won't have to tell the employees those login details. And they can keep coming back to that email on their phone if they want to log out and log back in later on. So if they log out, they can then use that email to log back in. If they do know their username and password, by all means, they're welcome to use those email details and username and passwords. So hopefully that'll help increase the uptake on the ClockOn Go app. All right, now jumping into timesheets. Here, so a lot of this may already, some people may know this. Hopefully you'll pick one or two little quick tips to help make life a bit quicker and easier in approving those timesheets on that. So first person, I've got a number of people here, a few little scenarios set up. So I'll just run through those. So Floyd here, he was sick on the Friday. There's a timesheet that would have been entered, say, from the rosters. So all of this information back has come over from the rosters. Now he normally works, say as a salary employee, would normally work every day of the week. But what I've done is I'm not really concerned, for instance, for him to clock on and off. I just need to pay the same hours every week. So if I come into the employee details screen, and now I quickly jumped on that using this quick icon up the top, but you can go to setup and employee details. And if I come into the special options tab, from here, I've turned on this create timesheets from working week option. So we're going to, in a moment, get into the timesheet approval screen. But what this does is by turning that on, it's going to have a look at what is set up here on the working hours table, be it just whole numbers for the days or actual shifts here. And when you enter into either the timesheet approval or the payroll section, it's going to auto create for the rest of the period based on these working hours here that we've got. So I can set up on the Friday the 19th, which typically on the working hours he works 9 to 5, and when it automatically goes in, it's not going to create a duplicated timesheet. It's going to leave that one that already exists, but we'll add all the others for the rest of the fortnight once we go into that timesheet approval. So we'll have a look at that in a moment, but that's one option here. Now I've also set it up for him that it is show as warnings on the none timesheets. So these two on the Monday and Tuesday, they're going to be none timesheets because there's no actual shifts that are connected to that particular timesheet. And the reason why I've left it at this point, and probably a good idea when you first turn this on as a warning, it means once you enter the timesheet approval or the payroll screen, it's going to show up as groups of timesheets that need to be looked at. And if it shows warning, then you can just quickly hit approve if you're happy with that to go through. Once you're comfortable with it, by all means, set it to allow processing, and then you won't have to think, and those hours will automatically get generated straight up. But it's just a bit of a way to catch you in case you've forgotten to put a leave time entry in on one of the days. It means that at least it'll pop up, and that might prompt you to say, oh, that's right, on the Thursday they were actually away on leave, so I need to update that particular timesheet. All right, let's check out Thomas here. Okay, so when you're in the timesheets, at the moment I'm just running through as individuals. So I can change the employees down here. I can change this view to be all, which will show everyone's timesheets. The maroon ones here I've got at the top at the moment, they're valid timesheets, but they're in the past in this particular database. So I'm just going to click, you can click on any of these headings to sort. So I've then turned those around, and you can use this errors and warnings. So using this filter on the type, it's going to remove any valid timesheet, and it's just going to leave you with a list of all the timesheets that you actually need to work at and fix up. So using the errors and warnings, as well as say sorting with the shift type, you can group together all of the leaves, all of the none timesheets. It's going to have all of the start times grouped together there as well. So it may help you get to say, if say it was all the leave entries, which it is for Thomas Blackwell, we can select all of those. Whoops, sorry, click on the top one, hold your finger on shift, and it selects all of those. And I can just auto-fill those. So I can quickly add the actual times on there. If I have a look here, doesn't have enough leave available just for this particular training. I am wanting to change that, because he doesn't have any leave available, to be unpaid leave. So I might just quickly go back to the individual ones, just so we're not looking at too much. I am just going to show all the leave entries here. So if I now select all of these together, I can click on edit. I can change it from annual leave, statutory, and change it down to unpaid leave. In this case, I need a general note for unpaid leave. And if I press save, it'll jump to the next timesheet in this period. But what I'm going to do is do apply all. It's going to make sure, do I want to change all of those in one hit? And I do. And it now changes all of those to unpaid leave entries. And you can see that they're all valid timesheets on that one. So hopefully grabbing sort of your leaves by group, you can quickly fill those, and using that shift type filter when you're looking at all, you can quickly just grab all of the leave entries and auto fill those in rather than going into each individual timesheet to be able to do that. All right, let's pick the next person here. Perry. So again, on that editing of multiple timesheets. So what we've got here, when I select, just single click on a purple timesheet, down the bottom, it's got a bit of information about whether they clocked on too late or off, or why it's gone purple. So if I select both of those, so you can use the shift function, or you can hold your finger on control and select the shifts you want as well, very similar to Windows in selections. If I click edit, we're now looking at both these timesheets. So we can click on next, and we can have a look at the Tuesday and the previous one. So because they're sort of both end times are a little bit different, I'm just wanting to update these shift times on them, but I'm not going to use the apply all. I'm going to use the save in between. So on the Monday, they finished at 5 o'clock. I want to change the shift to be 5 o'clock. Then I can press save. It saves that and moves it straight to the Tuesday, ready for the next one. So I'm just sort of working my way down without having to save, close, double click, just jump back and forth into those shifts in and out. And this one, I'm just going to update to 16:30, click save, and I'll press save again. And now we've got valid timesheets, and I've just gone through the list. Say with these particular ones, if I come in and edit, they both finished at the same time, and like I showed before, we can come into here and we can change that one to 1700, and we can use the apply all function because it's going to edit both of those in the one hit. So you can use a combination of the save and move through each timesheet individually, or you can select them and use the apply all to make changes to all of those timesheets in one big hit. All right. So here I'm going to sort of run through how to add multiple timesheets all in one hit. So I'm just going to sort by date. So first thing, so adding timesheets, if we click add, without any timesheet selected, the date that it's going to add it for is going to be the first date of the period that's loaded there and is the active period. If I just close that without saving. But what I want to do is I actually want to just duplicate this Thursday shift to next Thursday. So I can come into here, select the shift I want to duplicate and click that add button. And it brings all of the information through again for that particular Thursday. And I can just change the date at the top, click save, and it's then added the Thursday there with minimal effort on making changes to that particular timesheet. So that's how you duplicate timesheets. You can also generate multiple timesheets as well in one hit. And so I actually need the next week added in for this particular employee. So I can pick the dates and I want to do Monday to Friday. Now we already have a Thursday one. I often find it's easier just to generate over that whole period. So if you say you're doing it for a fortnight, but the person doesn't work on a Saturday and Sunday, still build it and then just go back and delete the couple of shifts that you don't need. And so when you're building the timesheets, you can come into this shift editor to add the shift and then add the time entries. But if you're building them sort of after the fact, or you want to quickly build them without having to go into there, there's a sort of a bug which we've ended up keeping because it actually helps a lot. So if you start typing in these time entry fields and just tab between them, once you tab through to the break section, it's actually going to create the shift during that time. And then we can click apply all. And I'm going to generate all the timesheets for that particular range. And then we've just got the double up on the Thursdays, so I can just go into that particular Thursday and delete it. So rather than adding them as all individual days, I can quickly then create all of those particular timesheets. Now you can also from here, if you were doing this, so say you've just got our time and attendance module and you're not using the rosters at all, you can create timesheets like that, and you can actually, select all, and we can from here, we can just clear those actual times. So you might be generating all those timesheets prior, ready for your employees to start clocking on against. So you can quickly make changes and remove those start and end times as well by using that clear function. So I'm just selecting all, and I'm just going to now autofill and bring all of those back in. Okay, if we go to our next person. Okay, so when I was talking before about the none timesheets, there's different ways that they can be handled within ClockOn. So typically a none timesheet gets generated when someone's starting to clock, but they haven't been rostered. So it generates, still records it. And if we just come into the employee details, oops, wrong person. So under special options, we need to make sure they've got the allow non-rostered clock on and off. And so if they clock on and off without being rostered, you'll get these none timesheets here. And at the moment, those none timesheets are going to show as errors. So in order to fix up a none timesheet that's got an error, you need to come in and physically add that shift. So I'm going to have to come into here and add the particular shift to fix that error up. So if you've got lots of people that are using none timesheets, that may not be the best option for you to do that for every single timesheet. So what you can do is you can change that to show as warnings. And then we'll come back and I'll just refresh the timesheet screen. And you can see now that they're showing up as purple timesheets. And so what purple timesheets allow you to do is I can now click the approve button, which then makes that valid. And I haven't had to add the shift in to make it a valid timesheet. So that's going to then look at the pay and timesheet roundings and essentially pay what their actual clock times are at payroll, or depending on the timesheet start and end time roundings and what will occur there. Or you can do the exact same as what we did there with the ones that are errors, and we can come in and we can also add the start and end times to make those become valid timesheets. And finally, which is sort of the setup for a lot of, probably a lot of salaried employees, and that is allow processing. So typically, and how we are sort of set up at ClockOn, we're all salary here. So we will have create timesheets from working week, and we'll have this allow clocking on and off using the working week. And our working hours will be set up here. So we'll be just clocking, and they just clock against these working hours. And we can allow processing. So even if we weren't using that working hours and they all come through as time sheets, sorry, it will, by setting the allow processing, I can just refresh that. Any none timesheet just becomes a valid timesheet. So we're not concerned that it's a none timesheet, and all the warnings have now disappeared. So again, it will just push straight through into payroll. So that can be a good way, especially for your salary staff, where you still want to record what they're clocking and have that in a report. But obviously, being salary, it doesn't really matter the hours that they're doing. They're going to get paid that same wage week in, week out. Doesn't matter at all. So by just having a play, that is set as a per employee setting. So if you do decide that you want to change it to show as warnings, then you're going to need to go through all your employees and change that out to be employee to be show as warning, or whatever that particular setting is in that function. All right. Okay, now okay, so now I've got some errors and warnings that I'm wanting to fix up, and I want to go into our rule sets and have a quick look at the pay and timesheet rounding. So understanding the pay and timesheets rounding for your employees or for the people that are on the rule sets are going to help you better use this approve button and speed up the time of approving timesheets. Now, I'm assuming everyone's already using this, but it can be a little bit confusing, so I thought I'd recover it. So say for those none timesheets that we just allow processing, it's not going to look at any of this information once it goes into the timesheet approval screen or the payroll screen. It's only going to have a look at this bottom section, which in this case, it's rounding to the nearest 5 minutes. Now, if you've got shifts, so you start and end times, it's going to have a look at this top section first, unless you're outside one of these windows, and then it'll start looking at the actual times versus this bottom section. So in here, I've got a pretty sort of generic, it's probably a lot more lenient than most people will have set up, but it's just easy to think and talk on the fly with it. So if we turn these on and off, this round to shift start when clocking on within 15 minutes from shift start, and same for the ending, it puts like a window around the start and end times. So if we click here, for instance, they clocked on too early. This 8:30 start, with just this setup, it means they can clock at 8:15 to 8:45. And they will still be paid from 8:30 once it goes into payroll. And same with the ending, with the 15 minutes there. So if, for instance, they clock off, at 4:45 or clock off at 5:15, they'll still get paid from 5 o'clock. So that's what that does. By ticking on these two or a combination of these, it won't matter if they clock on before the start of the shift, which is pretty common. Most people, they'll clock on, started at 8:30, clock on at 8 because they got there and they just want to have a coffee and get started at 8:30. So we don't care about that, and we just want to approve that through. We don't want to have to think about that. So by ticking that means anytime up to 8:30, I don't care. But if they're up to 15 minutes late, they'll still get paid from 8:30. And then at the shift end as well, if you tick that, it means if they work beyond the shift time. So in this case, 5 o'clock. I don't care, it's going to pay to 5 o'clock. So having this sort of setup here is going to give you more full control over what you're allowing into overtime or penalty as someone approving those timesheets. So in the case for the ending, so if we click here, they clocked off too late. So if I double click in this particular case, they finished at 6 o'clock, they'll roster till 5 o'clock. If I know that they just fluffed around for an hour and clocked off, which is probably unlikely, I can tick this approve button, which is really an override in this situation, and it's going to pay what that shift is. However, if I needed to pay them to 6 o'clock because of how we had that rule set up with the 2 tick boxes, I would then need to just come into here and I can set what that end time is that I'm going to be paying it till. Say for this one, they clocked on too early, they clocked on half an hour early. I don't care that they clocked on half an hour early, so I'm just going to approve, and I'll let that go through and do the roundings that need to happen when it goes into the timesheet approval screen. And we'll have a look at how these roundings look when we get into the timesheet approval. On this particular one is one that you sort of need to be a little bit careful, is they've come in half an hour late and they've hung back an extra half an hour. So they're technically doing their same 8 hours here, but if we tick this approve button, because of the setup that we had on the rule set in here, sorry, I should have left this one open, because it's clocking on and off for if they work more, it's chopping it to the end of the shift. In this case, by hitting the approve button, it's going to pay from 9 o'clock, not 8:30, because it's more than 15 minutes out, and it's going to pay till 5 o'clock, not 5:30, because it's later. So if we actually want to pay what they've worked there, we will need to come in to the timesheets here and change that to pay accordingly. So we've sort of got to shuffle that shift to then pay it accordingly. Now in this one here, they're inside the times. So they're more than 15 minutes late. And if we have a quick look at this, by default in the system around the shifts, we're getting these purple timesheets because of this plus and minus 15 alerts in the system. So we can reduce those as well. So there might be, if they do more than 7 minutes, give me an alert. You can set those up on the shift or globally. So in this case, when we click on it, it says there's a possible pay truncation. It's because they're inside the particular types of, inside those shift windows, and it's more than 15 minutes each side. So that's when it's going to start looking at the rounding to the nearest 5 minutes. So in this case, look, they're the hours that they work. I'm happy to round those times to the nearest 5 minutes, and we'll come have a look to see what that does when we get into the timesheet approval screen there. And then in this particular one, they've forgotten to clock off. We can just use the autofill, and it's just going to add that end time in there. You may want to put a general note in here. So it shows up in the reports. Being a general note, it is possible that it's going to show up on the app. We now have turned on and off the ability to view those general notes within the app. So that should come out in the next update for the app if it hasn't come out already. If it's an incident note, then it's only going to show on some specific sorts of reports here. All right, just so while we're in timesheets here, I did notice there's a question from Karina. How do you add allowances for either entire shifts or partial shifts if someone's allocated a TL role, they get paid higher. Okay, so team leader sort of role. So in this one, when you enter into the shifts, if you go into the rates button, I'm just going to save my timesheet. We can come in here and we can add, and we can use the shift times. We can use either a custom times if it's part there of the shifts. We can use their clock times at payroll, so whatever the rounded times then become, or we can use the shift start time and their clocked end time. So if you've got people that typically sort of do overtime, you can use a combination of those. I'm just going to use the custom times at the moment. And now depending on what rate schedule and special rates that the person has, you may have a list of special rates here. If they've got a rate schedule, so this particular person has a rate schedule attached to them, you can add a special rate for them in the future. So team leader role, you can assign it whatever that role is, and the percentage might be at 150%. And so we can then save that, and it now will show up in this special rate drop down, which will give us this here. Once you add it, just be careful. If you're adding it for the first time, it is going to break these start and end times. So this might have been part there of a shift. So 12 o'clock to 5 o'clock on this particular shift. So now we've added the rate change on here. There's a bit of information on the timesheet down the bottom that's been added. You're sort of not going to see it here. If you're in the rosters, you can do the same thing. You can double click on the shift and you can use that rates button. Or if you've got rates already applied to which is the rate schedule. If that's applied to the employee and you've built out those rates, you can, in the roster screen, right click on a shift, select rates, and choose what predefined rate that there is. And again, when we jump into this timesheet approval, it should show us that special rate's been applied to it, and it'll differentiate differently once it gets into payroll or in that timesheet approval section. All right, so I've sort of cleaned up all of our timesheets there before we jump into timesheet approval. So I'm going to close out of here and I'll close out of that. Okay, so with the timesheet approval, there's sort of two versions of it, or two ways it works within ClockOn itself. So if you've just if you've purchased timesheets, it's always hiding one on me. So if you do have the payroll module, you'll want this attendance, and it will already be set up to be partial timesheet approval only. So this will lock down the timesheets, but it's not going to roll them over the period and make changes. If you don't have our payroll module and you're just using our time and attendance or time and attendance and rosters, you'll have the full timesheet approval process, and that essentially locks them down in the system and then creates the reports required to then be able to output or use those reports to output that information into, say, your third-party payroll system there. So it also, in that full lockdown process, in that full lockdown process, it then will calculate leave. So it does still keep a track of the leave balances, and it locks down those into a period similar to how our payrolls are. And that allows, which I'm getting to later with the timesheet integration, it allows us to pick up that pay information that we've set up on those timesheets to show. So whether the overtime's kicking in at 150% on various times or various penalties. Whereas the partial one's quite useful for, say, if you've got remote offices and you need those managers to lock down those timesheets in order for a central payroll office to then run those. It means that they can look and see how those pay and timesheet roundings, what's happened. They can check out the allowances that are going to be applied. take note, when you're in that timesheet approval screen, you can't actually make adjustments to the allowances there, but you can see what are going to be applied. You can add new allowances if you need to. Some of the bigger sites may do that. And we have the odd managed payroll customer that does that. But normally all of that stuff will be done at payroll. But that will lock down those timesheets so they can't be edited, ready for payroll to just jump straight in there and do their thing. Most of our managed payroll customers use this lockdown process. By doing that, make sure that the times that they are saying that they want us to pay, or head office, whoever's doing the payroll, they are the actual times that I'm expecting to see paid. All right, so that full lockdown, it essentially runs a payroll, except it doesn't calculate, obviously, taxes and super and that sort of stuff that's around payroll. So I'm just leaving that as partial. So you shouldn't need to come into here unless you make a change from the package. If you've just added payroll and you had been using time and attendance, then you'll need to turn that particular function on. All right, so we'll come into home, come to the timesheet approval. It often gets called lockdown for the people here. It's sort of one of those terms that got changed over the years, and it still is stuck with us on lockdown. And I'm going to jump into this particular period. Now, remember when I said we had Floyd Everett and we set him up to auto-generate timesheets? At this point, when I click next, that's when those timesheets are going to be generated. So it's now starting to look at the rule engine in ClockOn, and it's generated those timesheets. So I now can double click or just single click and use the timesheet button, and it's generated all of those timesheets. If I double click on one, it'll just have a general note that they're auto-generated salary timesheets. So for the Friday, it's left that personal leave one that was already in there. It didn't create a duplicate, but for the next Friday, it's added it in. For these none ones, I can then just select all and I can approve them because I'm happy for them to go through as total hours. So like I said, it could be good doing it as a warning when you first start it, just so you make sure you look at those particular timesheets. Now I've got valid timesheets. I can click next. If there was going to be a rate update on that rate schedules, this will show up similar to payroll. We can turn this function on and off. May be useful for managers with to their head office to see, oh, this person's likely to get a pay increase, and there's various triggers on that. And then once we get into, for those of you who have done payroll and may never have seen this screen, it's very familiar. It essentially is our payroll function, just with some bits, like I said, tax and yeah, everything beyond tax isn't in there. So we can change the view. I like the medium view. It sort of shows everything down. Clicking on the Save Desktop means next time I come in here, you're going to see it all. So the allowances and deductions, it is just going to show you what's there. If you needed to make an adjustment to those, you can come into the allowances and make the adjustments, and all of these functions can be turned on and off if you don't want managers to be able to make those sorts of edits. But if you say, I don't want to pay these ones, they're not going to get passed through to payroll. So just leave sort of this section alone. It's more informational, other than it's showing you what allowances are being added there. Up the top section here where we've got the gross hours, we can now see where the penalty times and normal hours are kicking in, and anything changed here. Now, if we jump straight to sort of Billy here, which was where we did a lot of those changes and those approving on those hours. So here we have the change on the pay rate. It's still saying 100%, but you can see the dollar rate there is at 150%. And so, that's that special rate that's been applied to that particular shift. The normal hours, if we have a quick look at the timesheet, so I can still make changes to the timesheets from here. So you can see the start times here are all 8:30. So a lot of those are 8:30. So in the instance of the Wednesday, the 24th, if we have a look, it's still the 8:30 time, but the payroll roundings for this 8 o'clock start has now brought that in. And for this top one, the round to the nearest 5 minutes has kicked in on that 17th. So instead of paying for 8:53, it's paying 8:55 and 16:40 and 16:40 rather than 41 is 44. So you can come in here and check all of those hours. Once you click next, it will show you a quick list on who got overtime, so you can always go back and check those out. And once you're happy with them, we click approve, and that's now locked those timesheets down ready for payroll to do it. Or if you're just using our timesheet approval and rosters and that you're using that full lockdown, that's now completed that period. It's rolled everyone over into the next payroll period, ready for those to be done. And that step needs to occur to be able to then use the integration wizard. Sorry, it's 12 o'clock. I know I only had it for an hour. I will maybe keep going. If too many people start dropping off, that's fine. I will send you all through a link on where to go to for the webinar to see the recording of it. I'm just going to quickly touch base through this, but we will go a little bit more in depth. But this is more for those people who aren't doing payroll and are pushing timesheets to say to something like, to MYOB. So again, thank you for your time. Sorry I rambled on a bit. I hope I answered everyone's questions. If you've got more, either send them through to support@clockon.com.au or education@clockon.com.au. I've just got here, Cherie has just added a link to a feedback form. So if you're about to jump off, please go to there. I'm also going to send this out later. Love to hear what you have to say. All right, let's keep going. I should only be about another 10 minutes, if that. All right, so on the home tab, we can go into the integration wizard. Once we've locked down those particular timesheets, I can then select here what type of integration I'm doing. So I'm doing the MYOB timesheets. I've set up the integration. If you go to our knowledge base, it'll show you how to set that up. So you can select the companies because you can have multiple MYOB companies added to this. Now when I click next, I select the range that I want to work with. So it's going to be the most current one. So I can just use current pay period and load. I click OK. So now it's just pulling information down from the MYOB of our list of employees and also the relevant information about the different categories within MYOB. So here you can choose, you can see your list of people who are in MYOB. Once you've selected them, you can add them or you can do an auto assign. It's looking at their first name and last name for that. Once we click next, it then enters into the window here and we can have a look. So there's some information. We can add sort of automated lookups. We've got the category drop down here, which are being pulled from MYOB categories. And so this is the normal hours column. So it's called base hourly in MYOB. So I've added it here just from the drop down, but it hasn't added down to these other normal hours. So what I can then do is I can edit that rule mapping and I want it to actually sort by anything that's matched with 100% that's got normal hours in ClockOn. I want it to match to base hourly within MYOB. So if I click OK, you can see now that the base hourly gets dropped on all of those. Now this base hourly is still red for Matilda Cash. If I click on the information, it's saying that that employee doesn't have that category linked to them. So I would then need to go into MYOB and have a look at what that linking is. You can also, so it's a good place to sort of start here. So what, we've got a 200% penalty. I can come through here, penalties I've got set up in MYOB. If I click on the three little dots, I bring that in. I normally sort of tick up by location department, but you can have specific rules for specific departments or just for specific rule sets as well if you're wanting to link that depending on, yeah, there's a number of sort of ways that you can filter and auto match. We've found keeping it as simple as possible is actually going to help you the most in getting it happening and up and running. All right, and I'll set this one up. All right, so I've got break, time and a half. It's not linked to this particular person, so I might just, for now, call it as a penalty for time and a half here, so it's then valid. I've still got one error, that's fine. I'll just, oops. Sorry about that. So once that's through, I can click next. It still says that there's an invalid mapping, but I'm going to do it. We get to the submission page and I can hit submit, and it goes through and lets us know that it's submitted all that data to MYOB. I've just got a MYOB trial here. And if we come into the enter timesheets and select our employees, for that particular period that I've added it through, it's added all of those timesheets into MYOB using the appropriate categories, and they're ready to go. So, and then we can finish that. So that's a way you can quickly get all of your timesheets there into MYOB and start using MYOB for your payroll, and just using ClockOn to roster and record times efficiently. So by doing that, you still need to make sure you've got your rule sets set up that does the right calculations and all of that, but you still also have that final say there in MYOB before it goes into payroll, but it's just a quick way to get those timesheets in. For those of you who might be hanging back left that have got another third-party one, if we go in and we jump into the integration wizard again, it's hides at the moment because I'm through multiple screens. We can do a manual timesheet entry as opposed to one. We can then load that, the period that we want to work with. It jumps straight to the mapping. Now it's kept all of the MYOB ones that I have initially mapped, but in here, instead of a drop down, we can then come in and manually make those changes to what you have in your current system. And so once you've made all those manual changes, we can click next. I hit submit, and instead of submitting, it creates a file and it stores it in this particular location. And we can go to that particular location. And it opens up Excel and it looks at the export of the timesheets, breaking it down to the categories and lengths and with various information. So it's a good starting point then to be able to add this information into the system that needs it to upload into. So that might be Xero or Reckon or anything else that people may have. All right, thanks. So sorry I went over time. I should have timed or paced myself a bit better. I hope I've been able to cover everything. If anyone's got any questions, please let us know. Whoops. So thank you very much for that. Like I said, if you've got any additional questions, please email education@clockon.com.au, or if you need your IP address or something like that to get your ClockOn Go app happening, please just email through to support. And if you can please fill out the feedback form, it'd be greatly appreciated. Yeah, any information to help me do these better is greatly appreciated. And again, there'll be an email going around, or have a look at our socials. Once this is finished, we will then upload that to our website and you'll be able to access it. Again, thank you very much and have a great afternoon. Bye.